So let's start this second part of the course, which will be devoted to mean field games. And this is the analysis of mean field games. So I will start with the probabilistic formulation that we have seen just before, and then to derive. Go ahead.
One question before we start is a question from Bruno Nunes. And the question is the function mu is the Arzelà-Ascoli theorem unique? If that's not the case, does different unit functions B generate different dynamics on Maxwell equations?
The answer is indeed there can be. I mean, this is a Arzelà theorem, so there can be several limits, okay? But as soon as you assume that the function, the drift, for instance, is of the form something like that, empirical measure where B is continuous, of course the limit is unique here. The limit is B itself, okay? But in principle, there could be several models. It could be the case that there are several limits, but in general, I mean, the problem is set in such a way that the limit is more or less obvious, okay? So for instance, I can give many examples so far, but the typical examples that we can meet so the typical examples that we can meet in this theory is examples of the form B equal some function of the position. So I wrote it like that: x I of t, alpha I of t, and the sum or some function of xj of t. Okay, typically phi is a continuous function, okay, and it is an average of continuous function like that. Okay, in which case it's obvious that so you see where phi goes from Rd to I don't know, let's say to R, so it's a kind of aggregate quantity. So in general, it's a function of an aggregate quantity, okay? And of course, the limit would be B. So as n goes to infinity, this converges to a function depending on the position and the control of the player I, okay? And this becomes an integral of the aggregate quantity phi. So let's say it has a compact support or something like that. I mean, I put compact support to fix the ID to, okay, so it will be, at the limit, would be B, which depends on xi, alpha I, and the measure, and the dependence with respect to the measure would be like that, okay? So it would be an integral of an aggregate quantity phi, would be an integral of phi against the measure m, okay? So you see here that there is just a thing, I mean, if you work with aggregate quantities like that, there is just a single limit, okay, of the function. And this is really typically the kind of behavior we find, okay? Is there any other question? Okay, so now we go to mean field games, and so I rewrite the problem, okay, and then I will explain how we get solution, and when we can get uniqueness of solution, and how we use this solution to come back to the n-player game. And I forgot that I could remove my mask, so that's great. So what we saw before is that to find a solution to the mean field game problem, it means the following. So a mean field game equilibrium Okay, so it's an optimal control. Alpha bar. So I'm a little bit fuzzy about the place where this control takes its values, but I mean, it could take its value in a compact set, for instance. Okay, so the alpha bar would be a progressively measurable function, depending, adapted to the filtration generated by the individual noise. Okay, and taking the value in this compact set, for instance. Okay, I mean, at that stage, it plays. I mean, the exact assumption do not play much role. So this is an optimal control, which has the following property, which minimize so given a flow M, which is a continuous function in the space of measure, so M is fixed here, and for this fixed M, the alpha bar minimizes the quantity. We take the infimum over alpha of the payoff, the cost, which is some function of the position, the control, and this flow of measure. Okay. Again, I forget about the terminal cost. I mean, just by convention to cut the notation, okay? But you could have a terminal cost. And you have a constraint that the link between x and alpha is just the usual one. And again, for simplicity, I take the volatility equal to 1 and no common noise. Okay, so I've got these dynamics for the state variable. Okay, and this is an ordinary stochastic differential equation. Okay, because m of t is given. Okay. And Z naught is given. So you've got an initial distribution, Z naught, which is an element of, which is an integrable random variable. Okay, so M is fixed here, and the first step to solve my problem is that alpha bar minimizes this quantity. Now I must make the link between M and alpha bar, and in fact, this link is the following. So this is the first step, the minimization problem. And the compatibility condition is the fact that m of t is the law of the optimal trajectory. So it's the trajectory you get when you replace the alpha, which is here, by the generic alpha, which is here, by the optimal one, which is the MFG equilibrium. So this is the trajectory corresponding to the optimal constant. To the optimal control alpha bar. Okay, so you see that there is a fixed point argument somehow, because you fix M, you solve your optimal control problem. Somehow, implicitly, I assume that alpha bar is more or less unique. Okay, and in the end, you want to have this property that M of t is the law of alpha bar. Okay, so to solve that, there are two ways to prove the existence of such equilibrium. There are basically two ways, one which uses the probabilistic formulation and one which uses the PD formulation. I'm going to work with the PD formulation and then I come back to the probabilistic formulation after that, but basically they are more or less equivalent. So in terms of math, why is it a little bit difficult to proceed that way? The first thing is that it's not completely obvious to find an optimal control of a given optimal control problem. Okay. So what I mean is that in general, the alpha is in general a weak solution to this problem, and then you have to enlarge the filtration and so on. So you end up quickly in difficult issues here. So in order to overcome that, I'm going to write the PD formulation. Another way to do it would be to introduce forward-backward stochastic differential equation, which I'll do after that. Okay. So let's start. So how do we solve this problem in terms of partial differential equation? Okay. So the idea is to introduce a value function. So I'm going to solve this optimal control problem. So I fix M, the flow of measure, and I'm solving this optimal control problem. Okay, so you probably know that. The idea is to use dynamic programming principle and to write a PDE for the value function. So from now on, at least until I have finished the program of the optimal control program, okay, so I fix M, and only at the end I will come back to how to derive M through this relation. So in practice, okay, I am a newcomer in the field, okay, and I see how people behave. So I see M, okay, and I'm going to react as if M was fixed. Okay, so what I'm doing to react means that I'm going to solve my optimal control problem, which is here. Okay, so the classical way to do that is to introduce the value function. So I'm going to solve not the problem for an initial condition which is fixed and the initial time which is fixed, but for all initial condition and all initial time. So this is the same stuff, except that I'm replacing 0, the initial condition, the initial time, by t. And the constraint on the dynamics is the same as before. Except that now the initial condition is at time t, I must be equal to the x which is here. Okay, so I fix, and I do that for any tx. So t belongs to 0t, and x is in t. Okay, so I solve my problem for any initial condition. Okay? So the reason why I'm doing that is that when I know U, I'm going to be able to compute the optimal control in a more or less explicit way. Okay, I don't know if I need to enter the details, but so what happened is that U satisfies the dynamic programming principle. Okay, and if you work a little bit, this dynamic programming principle translates into a PDE. Okay, so let me quickly write that down. If you are not too familiar with this kind of stuff, I need to write a little bit. So the dynamic programming principle, which is a principle in the sense that I'm not sure anyone is really able to prove it in the general setting I'm writing it, but okay. But at least if you, I mean, under technical assumption, it can be proved, okay? So it says that if you fix any time h so t and x are fixed, okay? If I fix any h between 0 and capital T minus t, you have that u of tx is nothing but the infimum over all the controls of what you pay between t and t plus h. Plus what you have to pay after that, and what you have to pay after that if you play optimally is just the value function I times plus t plus h x of t plus h. Okay, under the same constraint on the dynamics. Okay. Well, I think all of you know that. So I'm going to be fast. If you need more details, I can give, of course. So now, if you do that for h small and you expand, and you assume that u is relatively smooth, and you expand this by Ito's formula. So here I'm doing as if u was smooth, okay? If u is not smooth, you have to be a little bit careful and work with viscosity solution. I won't do that. So assuming that u is smooth, you can expand this expression by Ito's formula. And what you end up is with the Hamilton-Jacobi equation. Okay, which says, in fact, so when you expand this expression by Ito's formula, you end up with u of tx, because when h is equal to 0, this is equal to t, and this one is equal to x, okay, by definition. Okay, so the u of tx simplifies, and the remaining term, combined with this term, gives the following. So I'm going to write it as a backward differential equation. So it's the time derivative of u, computed at tx, minus the Ito term, which is the second order derivative of u. Okay, and when you take so remember that the volatility is 1, okay? So it's 1 to the square, it's a half to the square divided by 2. Sorry, it's 1 to the square divided by 2, okay? So the Laplacian, which is related to the fact that I've got a d-dimensional Brownian motion. Okay, and there is a drift of that guy. So it would be the soup over all the controls of the drift of that guy. So it would be b of t x m of t, computed at the derivative of the value function. Okay, and there is this term here, L, when t is small, it gives you L of t. And okay, so if you do the computation correctly, you get 0 here. Okay, so just expanding this, you end up with that. Okay, so this is true for any control alpha. Okay, but since you take the infimum, when you do the correct arrangement, you end up with taking the supremum over all the controls. Okay? And this is an evolution equation. Okay, so you have to fix the initial condition or the terminal condition. Here it's a backward equation, so you end up actually with asking that u of capital T x must be equal to 0 with my convention that there is no terminal cost. If you had a terminal cost, it would be here, okay? So the important point, and this is what gives optimal control, I mean, it gives the PD approach of optimal control theory, is that you can find the optimal control by solving this problem. Okay? So the optimal feedback. So let me assume that the A here is a continuous function of the data. So here you've got an optimization problem, okay, which corresponds to the infimum here. Okay, and I'm assuming that this optimization problem depends continuously on all the data. Okay, so assume that A hat of T, X, and I'm going to call this data P. Okay. So it depends on time, space, forget about P, it doesn't matter. An empty. So this is the argmax over A of this quantity. I don't know why I put some T here, it's stupid. It's a mistake of me. And there is A here and there is A. Okay, so sorry, it's B of X, A, M of T, and the same here. So I assume this is unique and continuous with respect to the. Of course, this means that in practice, this means that du must be a little bit regular, huh? Of course, and there must be some convexity condition on L for this to be true. But if it's the case, okay, then this A is an optimal feedback. So what does it mean? It means that if you solve your stochastic differential equation putting A hat instead of alpha, then you get an optimal control. So what I do here is I replace my control by this feedback. And this control, this control would be optimal in my optimization problem, okay, for my value function. And in fact, this is true for, this is true for any initial condition. Okay, so this one, alpha of T, X of T, is optimal for Tx. So this is the reason why using dynamic programming Hamilton-Jacobi equation is interesting in practice, and because it gives you the optimal control problem. Okay. Okay, so now some questions, some natural question. When does this equation have a classical solution? Well, since I put a strong diffusion, okay, I just need to check that this quantity, which is called the Hamiltonian, is relatively regular with respect to its argument and has not too strong growth with respect to the gradient variable. Okay, so for instance, if A lives in a compact set, okay, and if the Hamiltonian is relatively smooth, okay, you have a unique, strong solution, unique classical solution to this equation, okay? And from this equation, you deduce that you have a smooth optimal feedback. Okay, so in other words, as soon as you have diffusion, sufficient diffusion, usually you expect to have a smooth classical solution. Now, when you don't have diffusion, so if your sigma is 0, for instance, okay, then your problem has shocks, okay, meaning that you is expected to be more or less Lipschitz continuous, in which case the definition of optimal feedback is a little bit doubtful, but you can play with that. I mean, you can play a little bit and get results which are similar to the one I discussed here, but things becomes a little bit more technical. So this part you can learn it in Fleming zone, Fleming sonar, for instance. The monograph by Fleming sonar. Okay, so remember our program. Okay, we started with a flow of measure. Okay. And in the first step, we have solved our optimal control problem. So meaning, we have found a solution to the Hamilton-Jacobi equation, okay? It turns out that this solution, so I didn't say it explicitly, but this equation has a unique solution, which is, of course, then the value function. From this solution of the Hamilton-Jacobi equation, you solve your optimal control problem by finding an optimal feedback, okay? And now I want to go back to my problem, which is relatively transparent, because now I just need to say that I want M to be the law of the x bar of t. Okay, and then, so what I want in the end is that the fact that M bar is the law of t. So M of t must be the law of x bar of t, okay, where x bar of t is just defined by the optimal, this is the optimal trajectory associated to the optimal feedback A at, okay? So in terms of PDE, this can be written as a solution of a Kolmogorov equation. Which is just a way to write the fact that M of t is the law of x bar of t, where x bar of t is the solution of that thing. Okay, so I'm writing it because somehow this is I'm going to derive the classical system for the mean field gain theory in terms of in PD terms. Okay, but it's already hidden here. Okay. So what is known is that if X is a process solution to this stochastic differential equation, then the law of X satisfies an equation which is called the Kolmogorov equation. And this is just what I'm writing here, okay? And this is a forward equation. It has an initial condition, which is that M naught must be equal to the law of Z naught. Okay, which if I remind you, it was in my problem. It was the initial condition. Okay. Okay. So to summarize, the PD formulation to my problem is the collection of the Hamilton-Jacobi equation and of the Kolmogorov equation, okay? Plus the compatibility condition, which is written here. So to find a PD formulation of my infield game system, we need to find a pair. So I'm going to write it in terms of value function and flow of measure. So U is my value function, M is the pair of measure, okay? Which satisfy exactly the two equations coupled for the A hat by this condition. Okay, so let me rewrite it down. Okay, so the Hamilton-Jacobi equation, I'm going to write it with the Hamiltonian, it would be easier. So H is nothing but the soup which is over there. I'm going to write it down, okay? So this is the Hamilton-Jacobi part. The Kolmogorov part, okay. Okay, I'm writing it as well, okay. And with the initial conditions. So the H here, which is, so the H is the Hamiltonian of the problem. Which is just a supremum over there, of minus B x m minus p, sorry. So for any vector p in Rd, okay, this is, which takes the place of du. The Hamiltonian is defined like that, okay? And the A is just the argmax for P equal du. So this is the argmax of this problem for P equal du. Okay, so you end up with what is called the mean field game system. Which is a system derived by Leslie-Lyons to express the mean field game equilibrium. Okay. So we suffered a lot, but once you have that, you have a system of PDEs, okay, and then you can use PD techniques to solve it. So I'm going to state the result, but you can see that it's relatively easy to understand how it works. So what I'm going to state is that this system, under suitable assumption on H, has a smooth classical solution, okay, in the sense that all the derivatives are well defined and continuous. Okay. So this is the main result, the main early result of Leslie-Lyons. If H is smooth enough, and has some growth conditions. Okay, so this means that this one should not grow faster than the square of du. Okay. Then there exists a solution to the Mitchell-Game system. So there is a classical solution in the sense that the derivatives, again, and the derivative of u and of m exist and are continuous, okay? So you have really, you can compute all the derivatives. So let me briefly explain how it works, and then I tell you how to extend the result to different framework, in particular when you don't have diffusion, or when you have degenerate diffusion. Is there any question? Okay. So what allows the PD formulation, okay, is to get this kind of very, very strong solution in which you can compute everything and you can do numerical computation. If you cannot compute everything explicitly. Okay, so how do we prove such a result? It goes as follows. So as we built it, it's a Nash equilibrium, so it's an equilibrium configuration. So we find it as a fixed point, the solution of a fixed point problem. So what you do is that you start with M. So given M, which is a flow of measure, solve the Hamilton-Jacobi equation. So you find U, okay? And once you have U, so as I explained, the solution of U of the Hamilton-Jacobi equation is relatively smooth under the assumption I did not state, okay? So some regularity assumption on the Hamiltonian, which is quite natural, and plus some growth condition, okay? And so you've got a smooth solution, and then you solve the Kolmogorov equation. So I remind you, it's so you find some new flow measure, M tilde of T, okay, which a priori is not related to M. Okay, so here there is an ambiguity because the A is related to the U here, so I should write it. I mean, I don't know. Let me be fuzzy a little bit about that. So, but the M here is the original M, okay, which was giving you the drift. Okay, so you start with M, okay, you solve your optimal control problem. This gives you a flow of measure, okay, so through the Kolmogorov equation. And the key point in the proof is to prove that you have a fixed point, okay? So you start with M, you end up with M tilde, so the question is, has it as fixed point so that you can solve your min-field gain problem. So it boils down to a fixed point formulation, okay? So when does it have a fixed point? Well, there are basically two types of regimes. There is one strong regime in which you can do it by Banach fixed point argument. So if t is small, or if the dependence of the function b and the function L with respect to m is small, but I don't want to quantify that, okay? Then you use Banach fixed point argument. So the interest to use a Banach fixed point argument is that it gives you a unique solution, okay? On the other hand, if t is large, okay, there is no assumption on t in the theorem, then you can no longer use Banach fixed point theorem, and indeed, you a priori lose uniqueness, okay? So you don't always have uniqueness, and to come up with a solution, you use Schroeder fixed point theorem. Okay, so what it means in practice is that you need to find a subset of this set which has sufficiently compact, which is compact, okay? And to do that, you need to prove some extra regularity in time of M and some extra integrability in space of M, okay? But I mean, in view of the equation, it is relatively easy. So typically, you can prove that in terms of flow of measure, M is Hölder continuous in this space. And if you assume that you have a little bit more integrability here, for instance, that it takes its place, it takes its values in a space of more integrable random variables, so in space. So you easily end up by using the Schroeder fixed point argument that you have a fixed point here, okay? Is that clear? Do I need to develop that? Don't say yes. Okay, now what I want to do is to explain how to use this kind of, so before going further, I said that when time is small or when you have small dependence with respect to the argument, the M argument, then you can use Banach fixed point theorem and you have uniqueness of solution. So what happens in general is that you don't have uniqueness of solution except some very particular structure conditions that I'm going to discuss now, okay? So the fact that you don't have uniqueness in general is not surprising. You have a Nash equilibrium. In Nash equilibria, you seldom expect to have uniqueness of solution, okay? But here, it turns out that there is a condition developed found by Lasserre and Lyons, under which there is uniqueness, okay? So when I put 2L, it means Lasserre Lyons. So it's a monotonicity condition. Okay, so more or less what it says is that it's a situation in which people don't want to be too close from each other, okay? So they want to be as spread out as possible, okay? So So typically, this is a game problem. Okay, so in game theory, when everybody wants to be very close from each other, okay, then this is very unstable because they want to be close from each other, but they don't say where they want to be. So of course you may have several equilibria. Okay, so Last-Leibniz condition is exactly the opposite. They are going to say that it's going to say that typically people want to be spread, quite spread out. Okay, so as separated from each other as possible. Okay, so for doing that, Lasry-Lyons introduced a condition which turned out more or less to be a necessary condition in large time for uniqueness. So if you have uniqueness for large time, more or less the condition I'm going to write is almost necessary, not only sufficient. So it relies on it has two parts, this condition, a structure condition on the Hamiltonian, on the one hand, and on the other hand, a monotonicity condition on a part of the Hamiltonian. So H is of the form, so remember, the Hamiltonian is written above there, so we're going to assume that it's separate. So it has a separate form. So typically, so remember it was a function of position, gradient of the value function, and M, and we're going to assume that it's separated, that the dependence of P and M is separated. So it's a Hamiltonian on XP, so this reflects the cost to move, okay? So I'll come back to it. I'll give you an example in a moment, okay? The cost to move is completely unrelated to the interaction with the other players. Okay, so there is this difference. I put a difference because we are used to that, but okay, so the price to move, which is here, is decorrelated. It's from the interaction between the position X of a typical small player and the crowd. Okay? So this is the first condition. And the second condition, so now we look at this cost, which is the cost of for interaction. Okay, and we want to say that this cost favors the dispersion of the crowd. And this you can see that it can be expressed in the following form. So if you take two measures, M1 and M2, and you look at the difference of these two measures, multiplied by M1 minus, integrated against M1 minus M2, this must be non-negative. Okay, and if you have these two conditions, then you have uniqueness of the solution. So I'm cheating a bit. I need this one must be uniformly convex in P. Okay, so I'm sorry. so the theorem by Illas-Lyons says that if you are in this regime, okay, there is a unique Minfield-Game equilibrium. Okay, so let me give you some example to fix the idea. So classically, the Hamiltonian one takes is just so it's a kind of kinetic cost for the p variable, okay, which corresponds to the fact that you pay. You pay directly your control, okay? So you pay alpha square in terms of control, okay? And for the f, the typical example we would have in mind is a function, so of x, an increasing function. So I'm going to cheat a little bit, okay? So it should be an increasing function of the density. Okay, so this function should be increased where f is increasing. So now, here, be careful, I change a little bit my notation. So now this is a function of two variables, so it goes from Rd to R plus to R, okay? So typically, and it's increasing with respect to the last variable. So what does it say? It says that, so this cost, which corresponds to, this corresponds to L of x a m, which is a half of alpha square. Okay, so you pay, you pay a square if you play the control A, okay, which is in Rd, and you pay also an extra cost, which is the price of the density of the value of the density where you are. So now here I'm assuming strongly that M is not only a probability measure, it's a probability measure which is absolutely continuous with respect to the Lebesgue measure, and I'm writing by mtx its density. Okay, so I was a little bit fuzzy about the assumption so far, saying everything is smooth and so on. Obviously, this one is not smooth. Okay, so. But this is what we would have in mind to translate the fact that I don't want to be in places where the crowd is too dense, okay? So since this kind of expression lacks regularity, what we do in practice is that you smoothen it a bit, okay? You put, so the true example should be some smoothing kernel rho, okay? That to smoothen the M, okay? But you keep more or less the same structure like that, and to keep the monotonicity assumption, you have to smooth it again a little bit. Okay, so okay, and it turns out that if F has this structure, then you can prove that the capital F, which is here, enjoys this monotonicity condition. Okay? And really you can see, I mean, if you take rho equal the Dirac mass at 0, you can see that this is really what you have to expect, that is, you pay if you are at places where the density is large. Okay? Okay, and the presence of the rho is here only to ensure that your function f is continuous in the space P1, okay, which wouldn't be the case, of course, if it was taking just the value of m of t, m of tx. So it should not be t here, and it's just a function of t. Questions? So let me just, how long do I have? I don't remember. We finish? Half an hour, okay. So let me show you briefly how it works, because it's very nice, and somehow it's related to, it's really an important condition, and under which the theory has developed a lot through the analysis of the master equation and so on. So I won't enter into these details, but this kind of structure and the fact that actually the U which is here still enjoys some monotonicity property of the same type is really important in the theory. So it's good to know a little bit why it's true and how one manipulates this kind of stuff. Okay, and to do the proof, I'm going to assume that we are exactly in this structure. Because things are more transparent in this case. Okay, so I'm assuming that my Hamiltonian H naught is exactly this one. Okay, so how does the proof of uniqueness work? So the existence, we know it, we have seen it before. And now about the uniqueness, so what you do is that you look at two solutions. And you look at the difference. And what you do is that you look at the difference U1 minus U2, M1 minus M2. So you look at this quantity. Okay, so the kind of monotonicity quantity. And you look at how it evolves in time. And we will see that there are two key ingredients. The fact that the Hamiltonian is convex with respect to P, okay, on the one hand, and second ingredient is the fact that F is monotone. And the two ingredients play a crucial role in our story. So this is integral over Rd of the time derivative of U1 minus U2. So let me call U equal U1 minus U2 and M equal M1 minus M2. Okay, now I'm going to use the equations. So for the first one, so dTu is just, so I look at the Hamilton-Jacobi equation, which is lost. Yeah, it's at the top, okay. So you have that this is a half Laplacian of U minus, so remember, I use this Hamiltonian, okay, so it's minus a half of du1 square plus a half of du2 square, okay, so for the H0 part, and now for the F, plus F of xm1, okay, so this is for du1, minus F of xm2. Okay, and this is multiplied by m, which is m1 minus m2. So this is for this part. And now I'm going to do the same for this part. So dtm, so it's u multiplied by dtm. So dtm, you look at the equation, the Kolmogorov equation. So the first part is linear, so it's a half of Laplacian m. And then you have the two nonlinear parts, divergence, the two divergence. Okay, so here I need to do a parenthesis. I'm going to. Okay, in order to compute the term, I must compute the optimal control here. Okay. So I look at this quantity, okay, so I need to compute the argmax of minus a half of a square. Okay, I realize that this is not completely transparent. It's just the fact that I took B, sorry, to deduce L from H, okay, I assume in fact that B is just alpha, okay, so this is an assumption, okay, so there was the assumption that H is of this form. You can get it by assuming that L is of this form and B be just the drift, okay, so it means that the player control directly is drift and not a function of the function of the control, okay. Okay, so if I look at my expression at the top, okay, I have a half of a square minus a, okay, the alpha dot p, and so minus f of xm minus p dot a, okay, and it must be the argmax in a, okay, so what it gives you is the Hamiltonian, okay, so but the argmax here is clearly a half of p. Sorry, p is du. Okay, so what I'm saying is that in my system, if I take the Lagrangian like that, and if B is equal to the control, okay, then the optimal feedback is just minus a half of the derivative of the, and of course I'm wrong, okay, it's not a half, it's just minus. We're going to converge. I hope it's correct now, okay. So here I'm assuming, so now I need to be precise. In fact, my control space is RD, okay, so my control must belong to RD, okay. So it's just minus du. Is that okay? So it's a fixed point. After several steps, it finished to converge, I hope. Okay, so once we are here, okay, so I'm going to complete my equation. So I use this control alpha. Remember, B is equal to alpha, so I got minus du of t, okay? So I plug that into the equation, okay? And so I got plus the divergence of M1 du1 minus the divergence of M2 du2. And that's it. Okay, now you do a little bit of computation, and so let me single out first the term in F. So you see that F of M1 minus F of M2 is multiplied by M1 minus M2. And my signs are wrong. You probably noticed that here I should have minus, and here I should have a plus. Okay, please do check, because but I'm pretty sure. So H is, H here is a half of du square minus F. Okay, so this is the reason why there should be a minus. So here there is a minus. So for this part, you see that the monotonicity assumption gives me a sign here, okay? And for the other part, we need to organize it in the following way. So M is M1 minus M2, so I'm going to singling out what depends on M1 and what depends on M2. So in terms of M1 here, what I have is that I have, so what I have is minus a half, so I'm going to start with a half of du2 square minus a half of du1 square, okay? And then when I do an integration by part at that stage, okay, so when I put the divergence on the u, what I get is minus, okay, so I put the divergence here, okay, so I get minus du times m1 du1, okay, so. Is that correct? Okay. So I did an integration by part at that stage. So by putting the divergence here on u. Okay. So this is the reason why you have du here times du1 times m1. Okay. And you have the symmetric part for m2. So I won't write it because you can treat it exactly in the same way. Okay. And there is one term I didn't touch, which is a term in Laplacian. So here you see you have a half of Laplacian of u times n, and here you have a half of Laplacian of n times u. Okay, so when you do integration by part, they go together. Okay, so they. Okay, and so when you compute this computation, what you get is the following structure. Okay, so you compute that. So you make plenty of mistakes in the computation, but in the end, what you get is that you get du1 minus du2 squared divided by 2. Okay? Plus the same term in terms of M2. Okay, so there is a kind of magic in the story. But you see that it's a sum, so it's a sum of two positive terms. Okay, remember M1 and M2 are probability measures, so they are non-negative. Okay, this term is non-negative by monotonicity assumption. Okay, and these terms are therefore non-negative also because M1 and M2 are probability measures. So all this stuff is non-positive. Okay, so what it says is that along time, this quantity is non-increasing. Okay? Now let's look at its value at time capital T and at time 0. Well, at time 0, M1 and M2, they start from the same measure. Okay, so at time 0, this is M0, this is, they are equal, okay, so this is 0. At initial time. Okay, on the other hand, I choose not to have a 0 terminal cost. So at time capital T, this is also 0. Okay, because U1 and U2 are 0 at capital T. Okay, so you've got a decreasing, non-increasing function which vanishes at the two ends, okay, which means that necessarily the derivative is 0 all along the time, okay? And now if the derivative is 0 all along the time, this means that this quantity and this quantity and this quantity are 0, okay? So now you can, because of sorry, because M1 must be positive because it's a density of a smooth distribution, okay, because of elliptic regularity. Okay, so you expect that M1 is positive, so this means that du1 is equal to du2. Okay? Is that clear, more or less? So I'm saying it again. You've got a decreasing quantity, which is this quantity, okay, which vanishes at both sides. Okay, so its derivative must be 0 everywhere, okay? This means that all the positive terms must be 0. Okay, so this quantity, for instance, must be 0. Okay, which means that du1 must be equal to du2 everywhere where M1 is positive. Okay, but actually you can prove by elliptic regularity that M1 has a positive density, so meaning that du1 and du2 are the same. Okay, and once you know that du1 and du2 are the same, this implies that the Kolmogorov, the two M1 and M2 solve the same Kolmogorov equation, so the second equation over there. Okay, which implies that M1 is equal to M2, and therefore, when you look at the Hamilton-Jacobi equation, that U1 is equal to U2. Okay? So the three steps are du1 equal to du2 because of that, and then M1 equals M2 because of the Kolmogorov equation, and then U1 equals U2 because of the Hamilton-Jacobi equation. Okay, so this shows that U1 and U2 are the same, and M1 and M2 are the same, and this completes the proof of the uniqueness. Okay, so what is important here is it's a solution which is extremely stable. When you do perturbation, you change little the solution. Okay, so this is a very strong stability regime. Okay, so what I want to do now is that I'm going to complete this picture by explaining you briefly how to use the solution of the mean-field game system for the n-player game. So you see it's relatively elementary. So what I want to discuss now is a link with the n-player game. So the question is, so far we derived the mean-field game in a rather heuristic way, to say the least. To be honest, there was absolutely no rigorous justification of what I did so far. Okay, and what we would like to understand is that if there is any link between the two problems. Okay, so in principle it should be the case, but it's not completely obvious. So there is actually two different ways to see the problem. The first one is you look at a Nash equilibrium in the n-player game and you want to pass to the limit. Okay. And the other one is, I've got a solution to the limit problem, so the mean-field game problem, and I would like to know if this solution has any validity in the n-player game. Okay, so there are really these two different ways. Okay, and what I'm going to explain here is the second part, the first part being much more difficult. I will finish on that. Okay, so the first step is I take a solution to the mean-field game problem, okay, and I want to know if I can use it in the n-player game. So a solution, I remind you, it's the collection of the value function and the flow of measure. So I remind you the min-field game system is a system which is at the top, okay? And the question is how to use it in the original problem. Okay, so the question is, so what I mean by that is the Nash problem, okay? And the answer is yes. And in fact, this was discovered by Wong, Keynes, Mallarmé in their early paper. And then quantified, okay, with sharp bounds by Carmona-Delary. So the idea is that with this min-field game system, I've got an optimal feedback, okay? So let A, how did I call it? Yeah. So let A hat the optimal feedback associated with UM. Okay, and then if all the players decide to play A hat, then this gives you not exactly a Nash equilibrium, but what is called an epsilon Nash equilibrium, that is an approximate Nash equilibrium. Okay? So with the notation I used at the very beginning, so if I take any player I, so remember, now I've got my solution in the game with infinitely many players, okay, and I plug it in the n-player game. Okay, so I take the cost I define for the n-player game, and I look at what I get when I play the optimal feedback A hat, and all the other players play the same optimal feedback. But of course, it's not. I mean, it's optimal in the n-player game, but not necessarily in the. Sorry, it's optimal in the min-field game, so the game with infinitely many players, but not necessarily in the n-player game. But what says the result is that you don't make a big mistake when you use it in the n-player game, in the sense that the deviation when you change your control, okay, but the other one still play the control J, is the deviation is not too big in the sense that this is a small o of 1. And in fact, we can quantify this quantity. Okay? So as usual, a small o of 1 goes to 0, as n goes plus 2 plus infinity. So in some sense, once you have solved your optimal, your min-field game system, okay, you can use that in a n-player game. So this quantity has been quantified by Carmona-Delary. The upper bound is not too good. In particular, it gets worse and worse when the dimension is large, when D is large. Okay, but you can quantify it, okay? And the proof is really related to standard argument in min-field limit. I won't do it, but... Okay, since every player plays the same optimal feedback, and this optimal feedback sees only the dynamics of this player. Okay, in fact, it's relatively easy to understand that you are in a standard framework of mean field limit. Okay, and you can pass to the limit in the stochastic differential, in the system of stochastic differential equation by a mean field argument. Okay, and then you plug that into the cost, and you can pass to the limit into the cost. Okay, so this works relatively easily. Okay, now what about the other direction? Okay, so as I explained, there are two directions. The first one is you take a solution of the mean-field game system and you build, after this solution, a solution of the n-player game. Okay? And the second part is limit of Nash equilibria if in the n-player game. So in other words, is the limit of Nash equilibrium in an n-player game is still Nash equilibrium, is the mean-field game equilibrium, and somehow the answer is not absolutely well understood. So it's a really difficult problem. So why is it difficult? It's difficult for the following reason. So what is the difference between a mean-field game equilibrium and an equilibrium in the n-player game? Well, so now I need to enter into what is a Nash equilibrium in an n-player game, because I was very, very fuzzy so far. But in the n-player game, the Nash equilibrium must depend on the position of all the other players. Okay? In the n-player game, okay, strategy, control, sorry. In practice, it depends on the position of all the other players. So it's a function, let's say alpha I for player I, which depends on, of course, on the guy itself and on the position, let's say in the simplest way, in a Markov way, when people play Markov controls, it should depend on the position of all the xj. Okay, while in the n-player game, somehow, you see that the control, the optimal control is the feedback, so it depends on time and on the position of the player itself. Okay, so you are losing some information in the limit game. Okay, so this guy, alpha hat, depends on time and on position of the guy itself, not the position of the other. Okay, so there is a huge difference in terms of structure. Okay, so this is a Markov form. Okay, and for this reason, the answer to this question is not completely understood. So I'm going to say a few words about the case where we know why it works and what we know. Okay. What's the subtlety in the general case? So the key question is, how do we lose this dependence? Okay, and this is the magic of mean-field game. Okay, which says that somehow we can ignore the dependence here and do as if the optimal feedback was only depending on time and on the position of the guy itself. Okay, so So there are basically three types of results. One in which one assumes from the beginning that the optimal strategy of the player, or the strategy of the player, is only allowed to depend on the position of the player I itself at the level of the n-player game. Okay? So this is what we call the strategy in open loop form. So three types of convergence result. So I said here that if we look at, so we can look at strategies in Markov form in the n-player game, okay? But it's not absolutely necessary. We could say, okay, people know where they are, okay, and they don't care about the position of the other, okay, and play in consequence of what they are, they are, okay? And they know the distribution of the other, but they don't know exactly their position. So they don't have a function in feedback form of the XJ, okay? So the first, so the open loop form means that in the n-player game, player play open loop, okay? Meaning that their strategy, in fact, is a function of their position. Okay? So I'm cheating a little bit because it might be a function of their position and the Brownian motion of the other guys. Okay, but basically it's of that form. Okay. So now you see that this structure is exactly the same structure as the limit problem. Okay, and then you have convergence. Okay. In the sense that Nash equilibria converge to Nash equilibria in a slightly weaker form, but I won't develop on that. And this has been discovered by Lacker on the one hand, and Fischer on the other hand. And this is a result which is difficult, but it's not too technical, and relies really on estimate on the stochastic differential equation. So passing to the limit in this system. Okay. So the point here is that there is no change of structure in terms of optimal feedback. Okay, from the n-player game to the limit problem. The second type of argument is requires a lot of regularity. So this is under a uniqueness assumption of the limit. So the uniqueness assumption, we saw that this is called the monotonicity Lyons assumption. Okay, and under this kind of assumption, one can pass to the limit even in the Markov form. Okay, so we have convergence for this kind of equilibrium. So I won't have time to explain that, but it's realized. So this is what we did with François Delarue and Lasry and Lyons. And it relies on what is called the master equation. So a kind of way to lift the mean field game system into a PDE in the space of measure. But as you see, it requires a lot of regularity because it requires that at the limit you have uniqueness of the Nash equilibrium. Okay? And finally, there is a convergence to weak solution. So here I'm cheating a little bit because it's not completely true that it converges to a mean field gain equilibrium. It converges to a weak notion. Okay, but I mean, in this setting, it's even weaker. Okay, so there is no more monotonicity assumption, and we look at Nash equilibria in Markov strategy, okay, and we get a weak solution. Okay? And this is a very beautiful result by Dan Lacker. So what is a weak mean-field gain equilibrium? It's an equilibrium in which the control is no longer adapted to the noise. Okay, so there is an extra randomness. So here the noise is just the idiosyncratic noise, okay? And you need to add some extra noise to take into account how can I put that? Some correlation between players. Okay, so you have some extra noise to correlate the player. Okay, so they need to correlate on something. Okay, and this cannot be just the noise created by the idiosyncratic noise. Okay. Questions? Okay, everyone is exhausted. And sorry, I'm even over time, so I'll stop here. So the next lecture will be dedicated to the mean field type control, okay, and the link with mean field gain through the okay, and the link with mean field gain. And I'll stop here.